Kisia is a former town clerk. He was the last town clerk at City Hall here in Nairobi. He's now joining us from our City Center studios. Thank you very much, Kisia, for joining us here. Big day as we just document step by step this final rites for the president before he's laid to rest on Wednesday. I think we can just start by what are your feelings are. How do you eulogize the former president?
First of all, thank you for having me here, and let me start by sending my personal condolences to the entire Moi family. I know they're grieving, I know they're hurting, but I think it's a time to celebrate because for somebody to have lived up to the age of over 95 is something that we can thank God for. I think that is what I could say, and of course, you know, Moi led this country for 24 years as a president, and before then, 12 years as a vice president. And therefore, he has been in our space for quite some time. There are many things we can remember Moi for. Most of them are good, in my view, and some of them could be bad. But I think this is not the time to judge anybody. Let us leave judgment to the Creator. I think Moi was a father figure, as many would agree. He did rule this country during very, very difficult times. So when we look at his success and maybe failure, we should look at the environment in which he was operating from. You know, any leader will respond to the environment you're operating from. And therefore, some of the shortfalls could have been because of the challenges that Moi faced. But I think what is most important, and what I remember Moi for, and maybe you'd want to agree with me. One is Moi set a very solid foundation on education. He deployed a lot of resources from his government, and he paid personal attention to education, both as a leader of government and at his private, in his private capacity. I remember when Moi was building a lot of institutions of higher learning, most of us questioned why, you know, we were having such a growth in the area of education. But we should thank him for his vision, because had Moi not built the institutions that he built during that time, would have been facing a crisis. And also, the quality of Kenyan education is fairly competitive globally. So that is something that we must be proud of. That is something that we need to celebrate about. The other thing that I think we should not take for granted is the issue of stability and peace. You look at the countries around East and Central Africa, or in Africa, they have gone through a lot of turmoil because of bad and poor leadership. So Moi left us a very stable country, relatively to those that are neighboring Kenya. And therefore, it's something that we need to celebrate, because let us not take it for granted. Kenya, and in this, you know, Kenya and indeed Nairobi, are considered to be a hub for business, industry, commerce, and communication. That would not have happened if we were not stable. So let us celebrate Moi for the peace and stability that he ensured that this country had and engraved in our foundation. The other thing is the repeal of Section 2A. Let's not take it for granted. Most African leaders, those who have been in leadership, would have found it very difficult to repeal a section of the Constitution that reduced the powers within the presidency. So the freedom and the space that we're enjoying currently is as a repeal of that section. And of course, the reforms that we've had as a country, the changes we've had in our constitution, let us celebrate and thank Moi for that. And finally, Moi left leadership peacefully. He handed over the reins of power to President Moi Kibaki. I mean, some other person, most of the African leaders, if your preferred candidate, you know, would have lost, he would have chosen to remain in power using all means. Remember, he had all the instruments of power. And at that point, he would have said, man, go to hell. Let me stay on, since my preferred candidate has not won the elections. But the fact that he handed over peacefully to Uhuru Park, handed over to Kibaki, and Kibaki did his 10-year tenure, let us celebrate Moi.
You came into a city hall as a town clerk, I think in 2009, if I'm right. Just about, what, 6-7 years since the president had left office. What would you say were some of the strong things? Did he still have a hold on Parliament, on rather City Hall, on how things were done? Any influences whatsoever?
Now, I think I would remember Moi in this regard. I started interacting with President Moi in the year 2000 as the chairman of NCBDA. And Moi supported NCBDA at a time that people thought that he would have really muzzled us out. But he gave us the necessary support, and we were able to partner with the Kenya Police. Remember, it is during that time that we started community policing in Kenya with the support of Moi. We also started Nairobi regeneration during his tenure. People may have forgotten, but let me remind you that it is Moi who started institutional reforms at City Hall through the appointment of Nairobi Interim Oversight Board that was funded by World Bank. So the reforms at City Hall started in the year about 2000 with the help of course, World Bank, and with the support of government and President Daniel Arap Moi. So he laid foundation that, I mean, many years later, I never imagined that I'll be given the opportunity to manage the city. But many years later, when I was given a chance to manage the city, I continued with the reform agenda that we had started. Because you cannot develop a city unless the systems and the institution has sound systems to ensure that it can deliver services. So let us again celebrate Moi. We can talk about the changes. I also remember that sometimes in the late 90s, when he allowed the government to form what then we called the Joint Industry, Commercial and Consultative Committee, which then changed during Kibaki's tenure to be called the Social Economic Council. So it only changed names, but the functions were the same. So the vision that Kibaki crafted, there was somebody who had laid some foundation before then. So let us celebrate our leaders. Where, of course, they fail, we should take this as a lesson. Let us learn any failure that somebody in leadership may have left behind as an experience to build our future and to lay a better foundation for the future and the generations to come.
So then what would you say was the vision that the president had for Nairobi City from where you sit? What did he want this to look like?
I interacted with President Moi, and I can tell you for free that Moi wanted a clean, secure, vibrant, and a home for all Kenyans. That was his vision.
All right, I'll be getting back to you shortly. For just those joining us, we're speaking to Philip Kisia, former town clerk from the year 2009 to 2012. And these are live pictures we are bringing you from Parliament as Kenyans continue to troop in to, give their last respects to the fallen hero, man described as a hero, as a statesman, as an icon, as a legend, you name it. Very many people have eulogized him as a man who ruled for 24 years with a firm but steady hand. So thousands of Kenyans have made their way to Parliament to pay their last respects to the former president. Even as we speak to those who lived during his time, as one of them being Philip Kisia, was a former town clerk, joining us or speaking to us from our city center studios. Let's talk about the city and the influences he had. We have Moi Avenue. I think it's one of the streets there named after him. Would you know the history behind that? How did that come to be?
Well, I think, you know, post-independence, some of the roads were named or renamed, and Moi Avenue was one of the roads that was renamed in honor of President Moi. Before you know, most of these names were, the streets were named after the colonial governors and the colonial leadership. So in honor of Moi, that particular avenue was named after him.
This man, being a visionary, seeing a clean and secure city. We've talked about, you know, some of the initiatives that he began, like the Nairobi regeneration. We are still having this conversation to date. What does that mean for something that started all the way in 2000? Where is a missing link? Is it still in line with what Mzee had envisioned when he was starting it in 2000?
I think the problem is not having a vision, but the problem is entrusting the vision and leadership on people who have no capacity. So the vision is sound, the vision is still there. Really what we just need to do as a Kenyan people is to entrust leadership to people who believe in the vision and people who have sound managerial skills and sound leadership skills.
All right, so as we go forward, what are some of the lessons we can pick up from the former president? What do you personally pick up from the president?
One, time management. The Mzee was very strict when it came to time. If Mzee told you he was meeting you at 10, it was 10 and not 1 minute after 10. And you know, time is one of the biggest resources that we can ever have to deploy even in the programs we're having. So if there's anything that Kenyans can learn from the old man, is managing time. You know, time is not a resource that we want to waste. Let us use it sparingly, and let us use it to ensure that we deliver our vision. The other thing that Moi, I can remember Moi about is, you know, he was fair. We have said a lot of things about Moi, about his bad leadership. But if you look at any institution that Moi, you know, formed, like the Nairobi Interim Oversight Board, we were 7 members of the board, and he had picked one person from every province. So that board had a face of Kenya. If you look at his cabinet, his first cabinet, I have looked at it again. We had people from, you know, to a large extent, Kenya was represented. There was a face of Kenya. So the issue of fighting, I think, corruption, probably he may not have succeeded, but those are lessons that we need to learn from. And of course, you know, Moi was, Moi had a great heart. He was a kind man. To a large extent, he assisted a number of people, and they have given their tributes. So that's, again, something we can learn, humility. The man was humble, despite the fact that he wielded a lot of power.
Well, as well, and you eulogize him as a lot of people have, who have also been in the public service, and, you know, some of the striking characteristics of Mzee. But getting in as a town clerk in 2009, I'll keep going back to that because you're well known as a town clerk, as the last town clerk really at City Hall, or the last CEO at City Hall. And Mzee having been in office as a president for 24 years, it means there was a lot, you know, of his hand in the way City Hall operated. What kind of City Hall did you get when you were getting into office?
Well, again, as I said, we must learn to celebrate those who have been there before us. Before I took over office, my late brother, John Gakpo, had done a lot of work. So when I went in, at least I was not starting from zero. I was starting from somewhere. But when I took over, I decided to focus on building the institution. Therefore, I really gave a lot of time to institutional reforms in the area of financial management, in the area of ICT. Now, I mean, you'll appreciate that the automation of parking, it is sad that that was not taken forward. I would have imagined that by now, the entire operation of the city should have been fully automated. The issue of doing a comprehensive human resource audit or review, because you'll appreciate that it is the human resource that delivers services. So if you don't have skilled manpower that can deliver your vision, again, you're bound to fail. The issues of, together with my team, we put in place a master plan for Nairobi that was released in 2014. So those who took after me should have now prepared area-specific plans for the city, drawing from the main master plan. Remember, we also started the process of carrying out a comprehensive asset review so that we know exactly where we stand in terms of our assets and liabilities. So there are a number of things that we started in terms of reform, but those are probably things that you will not have seen, but you need to, to ensure that an institution is functioning properly by ensuring that we have systems and procedures that are documented and can work. So that it is not about the person holding office, but the institution that is able to stand on its own.
Having been a public servant, and Mzee having been a public servant almost all his life, since 1955 when he gave up teaching, and I know a lot of people who are in the public service right now, people who learnt and got a lot from the late Mzee. What would you say are some of the things we can pick out as far as public service is concerned? What struck you the most from this man as a public servant?
Really, power is temporary. Power is not permanent. And what I picked up from Mzee is humility. And, appreciating the fact that you are there to serve, and therefore you're a servant leader. So exercising servant leadership is something that was very strong within Mzee. And it's something that civil servants need to appreciate. And, try and exercise, because you are not there to serve yourself. You are there on a temporary basis. So when you are there, give it your best, serve the public, exercise servant leadership.
Let's talk about some of the initiatives that Mzee came up with, some of the things he really stood up for. We're talking about the Nyayo philosophy, peace, love, and unity. We're talking about his efforts in education, in the environment. Talk to us about that. What can you remember? Because I believe when he was in power, perhaps maybe you were growing up.
Well, I think when he took over the reins of power, I was in primary school. I think I was probably, if I remember, in class, no, I was actually in secondary school. I was in secondary school, if I remember, I think probably Form 2. And really, it was, I was really glad to see Mzee coming up with a philosophy. He took over from the late Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, who led this country for slightly over, I think, 12 years or so. And at the time he was taking over, of course, there are those who could not imagine that Moi would be there for some time. Some people called him a passing cloud. And, just to ensure that the country remains stable, he came up with his philosophy of peace, love, and unity. I think that philosophy really helped to stabilize this country, because if he had, at that point, exercised, his full authority and power, probably would have had a lot of disintegration within the country. Moving from one African leader, and Mzee Jomo Kenyatta was fairly strong, to another leader that people at that time perceived to be weak, was quite a challenge. So his philosophy did help stabilize this country.
What do you remember most about, what was it like growing up at a time when the former president was, in office? What was it like? You mentioned that you were informed to take us through some of your fond memories that you got from him.
His love for children. Moi was always around the kids, and bringing himself to the level of children, being the father figure. Moi came up with programs like, providing free milk for students. So those are some of the few things that I can remember Mzee about. And again, of course, there are a few things that I can remember, like when he built Nyayo Stadium. We, for a long time, only had a small stadium, city stadium, but he came up and built more and any Nyayo Stadium for the All-African Games. So Moi paid a lot of attention to sports. I think those are some of the things that I personally can remember Mzee about.
All right, thank you. Philip Kisia there, the former town clerk, City Hall, just reflecting back on what the late President Daniel Moi presidency meant for him, some of the lessons we can pick up. And I think just before I let you go, I know you've tried your hand at politics and the space in leadership in Nairobi County. Are you picking up some lessons from the former president as far as, political lessons from the former president, if at all you're still interested in it?
Of course, there are a lot of lessons you can learn from Mzee. And one thing is, picking your partners carefully. Because that's an area that probably, in politics, if you don't select your partners carefully, you can end up losing. And I'm talking about, ensuring that you are in a political party that believes in fairness. That is critical in politics. And also, I think Mzee gave a lot of people opportunity to exercise leadership. There are some people who never been in leadership had it not been Mzee. That includes His Excellency the President. He gave him a chance. If Mzee had not given him a chance and made him the chairman of Kenya Tourism Board, then of course a minister, and finally became a president. So, building people's capacity and assisting people to grow in the areas that they can excel is something that I've learned from Mzee. So, but the biggest lesson I've learned is, please, it is important for one to be very, very careful when you're picking your partners, because your partners can either make you succeed or they can actually make you fail. And in this, and I'm talking about political parties and political leaders.